Welcome to Betrayal Trauma Recovery, BTR.org. I'm Anne. I'm sure you remember what it was like when you were searching for help, maybe for your husband, hoping to find the right program or therapist. That's why I started podcasting. I supported my husband through 7 years of pornography addiction recovery, and not one therapist during that time told me I was experiencing emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion. I didn't want any other woman on the planet to be in the dark. If you're like the majority of my listeners, you're experiencing the type of abuse that's invisible and difficult to wrap your head around. Your husband is using porn or having affairs or lying to you, and you're getting the same bad advice about how to improve communication or your relationship. If you need support from women who totally understand, check out our daily group session schedule at btr.org/group. We'd love to see you in a session today. One simple, anonymous way to help spread the word is to click, follow, or subscribe to the Betrayal Trauma Recovery Podcast on your favorite podcasting app. While you're there, every 5-star rating helps make this podcast more visible and will help save other women from getting the wrong kind of help, like a couple program that will make this type of abuse worse. For those of you who follow or subscribe to this podcast, thank you so much. Your support means so much to me. Because my son had a band trip and I was a chaperone, I have a special friend who came to my house today, and she is in my basement recording with me. We're going to call her Joyce. She's a member of the BTR community, and I know her in real life because the story takes a dramatic turn. Start with her story, and then near the end, we'll talk about how all the emotional abuse she recounts affected her body and her health. So let's start with the beginning of your story. When you first met your husband, soon to be ex, how did you define his behavior at first?
We met on Tinder, and I had actually canceled our first date because I was getting very exhausted by dating. But when I got home for my first date, I just thought he was so nice because he told me that he had picked a smoothie place because it was public and it was short and there were cameras, and he thought that would make women feel safe. And in my mind, I thought, oh, that is so considerate. This guy's looking out for women's needs. Awesome.
Hyper-aware man.
Yes. Within a month, we were dating. And within 3 months, we were engaged. Very fast.
I, too, had a very quick engagement.
Ah.
Good times. When did you start recognizing that some of his behaviors maybe weren't what you were looking for?
You know, something I've struggled with my whole life is ignoring my first instincts because I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. So even while we were dating, there were times where I was like, that's a little odd, but I am better at doubting myself than doubting other people. I remember he got really angry at a bill on one of our dates. He thought they had overcharged us, and he apologized to them after, but it was not something I was comfortable with and didn't really know how to address. If I'd known better or was more comfortable with accepting that something is a red flag, I would have made different choices.
We've all been there. We've all been there. You just don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
Yeah. So you get married, and when do you start recognizing things are really kind of strange? And then what reasons do you give for this behavior? Like, he's stressed. Can you through that thought process?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say it happened really fast. On our honeymoon, in fact. We went to Hawaii, his choice. At a restaurant, I ordered a ginger beer, which is a non-alcoholic beverage, but reminded me of my childhood, and it was something that my dad would get us around Christmas, and I thought that was a fun thing to do. It's Hawaii. It's a tourist trap.
It's your honeymoon, too, right?
The drink was $6, and my soon-to-be ex got infuriated that I had spent that kind of money on something. He wasn't yelling, but he was very stern in the restaurant, and then when we got into the car, he wouldn't speak to me. A tactic that he started using then and used throughout our marriage was to say, well, help me understand why you made that decision, Joyce. Why did you do that?
Like in a condescending
I have made a bad choice, and you'd explain to him why I made that bad choice, like you're talking to a child. Mm-hmm. I said, I don't understand what the big deal is. I don't know when I'm coming to Hawaii again. It's our honeymoon. I just thought it would be fun. and I don't know why you're so upset about just a drink. And he apologized. And I think that's one of the few times he apologized for an overreaction. And I know it's triggering to say overreaction, but it is actually an overreaction.
Oh, for him.
For him. What he did.
We are not overreacting, but
Right.
he was definitely overreacting because there was no reason for him to get upset about that.
Yes. And for additional context, I paid for the meal. So I was not putting an expense on him. I was paying for it. The next morning, I was still feeling a little weird. He was still asleep. And I went for a walk around the block and I just thought, okay, this must just be what marriage is like. It's going to be fine. Just take a few minutes and go back and it's going to be fine. It was in fact not fine.
Was not fine, but you did not know that.
No.
Right. You didn't know that. Did you tell anyone about this back then?
No. For context, he was married before, very briefly in his mid-20s. And then we got married at the end of his 20s. And other people potentially interfering with their marriage was an issue, and said that he was very uncomfortable with us talking about things to other people. Very quickly, he started putting restrictions on what I could and couldn't say to people very early on. And the restrictions increased. So no, I did not talk to anybody about that. Anytime he caught me talking to someone, or if I said anything out of line, it would result in a serious argument.
Okay. An emotional abuse episode.
Yes.
But you didn't know to call it that back then.
No.
Back then. Yeah. What did you think about him? Did you think it was you? Did you think it was him? What's your thought process back then?
No, I 100% thought it was me. Absolutely. Yeah, I thought it was me. I'd never been in a long-term relationship. He seemed so much more well-spoken than me, framed himself as more intelligent.
He'd been married before.
Right, more experienced. So I thought, oh, it must be me. I don't know what I'm doing. And he would frame my friends and family as weird or odd, so I didn't have good influences, so I don't know how to appropriately, in his words, behave.
Knowing you for the amount of time I've known you, you are always behaving appropriately. So I can't even imagine what he would be talking about. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Did you know about any porn or infidelity?
Yes. Shortly before we got engaged, he told me that he had a porn addiction that had surfaced after his first marriage. He told me it was not a problem while he was in a relationship. Only when he was not in a relationship did he have this problem. In other words, in my mind, if he's getting his needs met, if you know what I mean, then it's not a problem. And I just responded with empathy. And I said, that must be so difficult. Is there anything I can do to support you? And he said, oh, that's it. That's all you need to do. And so I did go into the marriage knowing he had a porn addiction.
Did he use that against you? Threaten, like, I have a porn addiction if I don't get sex?
Mm-hmm. I don't think it was ever that explicit, but it was definitely implied that if he was, like I said, getting his needs met, then he would not have that issue. So the pressure definitely was on me. And if I didn't comply with what he wanted, then I was the instigator of his porn addiction at that point. He would use it as a tool to manipulate me in other ways. Like, if he wanted privacy, he would accuse me of spying on him, which I was absolutely not doing. I would just come in to see him and say, hey, how are you doing? He would be in his office. And he'd say, I don't like it when you do that. If I'm in here, you have to knock. And if I don't give you permission to come in, don't come in. Otherwise, I feel like you're spying on me. Which, out of context, is insane. But in the marriage, again, it just made me feel like, oh my gosh, I'm the worst wife ever. That he thinks I would spy on him.
Hopefully he knows by now that all wives observe their husbands. So he had something going on that he didn't want you to know about.
I do believe that now. I have no proof of that. I never spied on him, never opened his phone, his computer, anything like that. So I have no evidence of that, but his behavior would suggest.
Yeah. Well, and that he
otherwise.
told you that. Yeah.
Right. And I never asked him about it. I never pressed the issue. I wanted to trust that if that's something he wanted to talk to me about, he would. Misplaced trust, as it turns out, but that's how I thought about it.
Had you done any research about pornography addiction? Did you know how it affected people or how they acted when they were using it?
No, all of my information on that was just anecdotal stuff you just pick up along the way. People talk about it in passing, and also whatever he told me, which was not much.
Okay. So not you weren't like, oh, I'm going to research a ton about this or anything like that. Okay.
No, I felt like I would be stepping on his toes. This is why the accusation of spying was really jarring for me, because I try so hard to give people emotional space. And I didn't even research porn because I thought, well, he's an adult. He can talk to me about it and we'll go from there.
Do you think you're naturally that way to give people space, or do you think some of it was him manipulating you to back off?
I think there was an element of that. I had some abuse from a caretaker when I was growing up that made it easier for him to feed into. It's
like your insecurities.
Yes, I had insecurities.
And it doesn't make it your fault. He was exploiting your weaknesses instead of loving you and supporting you in your weaknesses.
Yeah, and interestingly, when I opened up to him about the abuse, he told me that I must be exaggerating. That didn't happen. So he, in fact, did not believe me, which was very odd.
Yeah. Yeah. Or not so odd, since he was an abuser.
Right. And that actually makes more sense now, because I was like, why don't you believe me? Why would anyone tell you that? And anyway.
And then argue with me about it. So what do you do to try to solve, quote unquote, your problem that's really his problem?
Oh, I went to therapy. So much therapy, including couples therapy. None of which helped that issue, because it wasn't me.
Right.
But I spent, years. I went through 3 therapists, personal therapists, in our marriage, because I was convinced it must be me. The first one, she was not super helpful. She just told me to journal and never gave me any other insight. The second one, he actually, I called him to cancel a session because I was distraught. After an abuse episode with my husband, I called my therapist to cancel because I couldn't deal. My husband called me to try to, quote unquote, work it out. And my dad was listening at the door. And I think that was the first time he started to get an idea that things were abnormal. They weren't just like marriage growing pains or things like that. He talked to me after and he said, it sounds like he's putting everything back on you. Is that normal? And I made excuses, said, no, he's right. I'm overreacting. And I went back the next day and found a different therapist because he wasn't comfortable with me going to that one anymore.
Okay. I think it's really telling of the state of therapy that so many therapists have a really difficult time helping people identify abuse. They don't want to make the wrong decision. Like, maybe this person is the abuser, so I don't want to say they're being abused. But even if that person is the abuser, then wouldn't getting away from their victim be helpful to the victim?
Yes. I honestly, I think it probably stems from people being afraid of lawsuits or losing their license and ability to practice.
100%, because their license is a marriage and family therapy license.
Right.
And they could lose their licensure or be sued. According to their licensure, can't really help people identify abuse, which is awful. People can go to therapy for years and years and years and not know they're a victim of abuse and that none of it is their fault and that they don't even need to be in therapy.
That's probably why there's such rampant abuse and such negativity toward women because
Yeah.
these things are not getting addressed.
Right. If he did go to a therapist, it wouldn't help him, though.
My soon-to-be ex, he went to therapy probably just to tick off the box. He went to 2 sessions, said he didn't like the person, and it was too exhausting to try to find somebody else, so he was not going to look anymore.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
even if he had found one, I mean, mine went to therapy consistently for 7 years, and the therapist loved him and they thought he was awesome
Yeah,
because all he did in the session was convince them that I was crazy.
sure.
And so he didn't get any help for himself, and I became more and more the enemy because what he was telling the therapist wasn't true. So you can't get help if you're not willing to tell the truth. He loved going to therapy and lying to the therapist and having the therapist tell him what an awesome guy he was. That was his favorite thing.
That makes me so angry. You're not crazy. I'm sure
Thanks.
you know that.
Thank you.
Sometimes you got to hear it.
You heard it from her. She knows me in real life. And apparently in real life, I also am not crazy.
Not crazy. Very sane.
Thank you. So when did you realize that your efforts to fix yourself, they're not helping your marriage and they're not helping you? When do you recognize all this therapy is not helping?
Horrifyingly, I only really realized that within the past 6 months. I felt like I was a more capable person than I had been in a long time emotionally. And it's like the fog was lifting and I was thinking, wait a minute. This is not me. I've done all this work. I've been doing this work for years. And things started to click that no, it isn't me. We don't have children. We have dogs. I was taking one of our dogs to the vet and the words came into my head, you can't rely on him. And that was the first time that I realized that I cannot rely on this person for anything, to be emotionally available, to treat me with any degree of kindness, let alone be an equal partner in a marriage. There was no equality in our marriage ever. That was a really stark realization. It was at that point that I started thinking, okay, so what are my next steps? And I didn't know what to do. So I talked to family. So I was laying some groundwork. But yeah, once you realize there's a problem, the next problem is figuring out what to do.
Yeah. And that is where BTR comes in. That is our full-time job. First of all, educating women about the situation. Like, this is emotional abuse. This is psychological abuse. It is sexual coercion. And then helping women know what to do next. So if you're listening and you're wondering, what do I do? The Living Free Workshop is a great place to start. If you have kids, is really important to know how to communicate with him. So the message workshop, that's important. Most women who come on the podcast have listened to the podcast and they meet me through BTR. That is not how we met. We met in a dramatic way. So we have a new congregation. My junior high choir teacher, he kept looking at me kind of weird in church and was like, "Where's your husband?" I was like, "Oh, I'm a single mom." And then he found out that I do abuse stuff. And he was like, "My daughter is in this situation and maybe you can help her." And I said, "Okay, have her call me."
This choir teacher is my dad.
Right. So I did not know her at the time. So I didn't know who this daughter was that he had.
Right.
So the choir teacher in my congregation and her father are the same person.
My dad had been concerned for some time, but it was, like I said, only recently that I had been having conversations with him about it because my spouse had isolated me from family and friends. They were not allowed to come to the house. There was limited time that I could spend with them because if I was gone for more than a half an hour, he would start calling and checking in, seeing when I was going to come. A couple of weeks before my dad gave me your information, my soon-to-be ex had gotten very angry and told me that I was holding him back in life and that I may as well be like the person who abused me. And I said, why would you say that to anyone who has been abused? That is not okay. I said, if that is how you feel, we should not be married anymore. And he got furious and broke a TV tray.
On purpose.
on purpose.
So physical abuse in the form of physical intimidation, but most people aren't educated about that. So they
Right.
don't know that that is physical abuse in the moment.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
And it was scary. It was right next to one of our dogs. I said, "Stop. You're scaring everybody. Please stop." And then he turned it on me and he said, "This is your fault. You're the one making everyone upset." This goes on for a couple hours. So the next night, my spouse had been showing me a video of one of our dogs on his phone. We were sitting in bed. I lean over, I'm looking at this video. And then some time has gone by, a few seconds, maybe a minute. And then I feel him grab my face and shove me back hard. I had a shooting pain in my neck. And I was stunned for a minute and asked him why he did that. And he said, "Oh, you were in my personal space." And he was very calm. He wasn't angry. There have been other times where he has shoved me and things like that. This one frightened me because he wasn't angry.
You would say overall, just for our listeners, 99% of the abuse was emotional and psychological, right? And sexual coercion.
Yes.
Okay. So this physical incident is not something that was a normal thing.
No, this was a major line being crossed. I don't know if there was some residual anger. I really don't know.
Knowing a little bit of the story, I think he's sensing that he's losing control.
Right.
And he's trying to assert control again.
Yeah. I sensed that was a turn in our marriage for the worse, and I was seeing an escalation in behavior that I felt was inherently violent. There was a violent undertone. Not to mention this was physical violence now. I have an injury, and I told him, "Hey, that really hurt. I have some pain. Why did you do that? Can you please promise me never to do that again?" He said, "I'm sorry your neck is hurting." That's the only apology, by the way, I ever got. And then he said that I need to stop talking that way because if someone heard me, they'd accuse him of doing something wrong and that his guns would be taken away. And the minute he brought the guns up, there was just like a shift in the atmosphere. And I was like, "Oh, okay, this is a problem. I don't know what to do," because if that is where his head is at, not that he just did something uncalled for and physically injured someone he says he cares about. He's worried about losing access to firearms. That's a problem. So I'm trying over the next couple weeks to sneak things out of the house so that I can leave. As I mentioned, I don't really have much time or space to do that where I'm not being observed. So it's not going well. But I had been meeting my dad for lunch when I was at work. And I was starting to tell him things are very bad. But then my dad gives me your number. And I call you at work.
I am at work all the time, but she was at work when she called, is what she means.
Correct.
Because
yes.
I work from home.
Yes. I work part-time remote from home and part-time in the office. Luckily, I was in the office when I called you.
We deal with emotional and psychological abuse here at BTR, and safety is up to the woman who's going through it. Our only goal is safety. Whatever you think that you need to be safe, we validate women. Divorce isn't going to solve the problem in so many cases because if you get divorced and you share children, the abuse is going to continue after divorce. So finding safety is different for everybody. All this to say, I teach women safety principles and how to be safe and what safety looks like, have them take the Living Free workshop, consider their options, take small steps to discover what's right for them. I knew she'd be calling me the next day and I could not sleep, and I was thinking about all the things her dad had said over and over. I felt like it was the spirit telling me, for those of you agnostics out there, my gut, I don't know, the universe, but I'm feeling like this is God telling me she cannot go back home. She can only be at work once a month sometimes, or maybe once a week. And if she doesn't get out tomorrow, she's gonna die. Like, she's in serious danger. and having a friend of mine have her son murdered. Murder is an issue. Like the Josh Powell story. He was never physically abusive that we know of until he murdered his wife and then he murdered his children. Michael Haight, I talked about him on the podcast earlier. Same thing with the dentist that I talked about. They're not murderers until they become murderers. By that time, you're dead and they're not. So alarm bells are going off in my brain. I'm not the kind of person who's like, you have to get out right now. I mean, that's not how I do my job. I've never been that way. So I'm thinking this is weird, but the panic bells are going off for me even before I talk to her based on what her dad had told me.
Right. Along with that, before I went into the office, my spouse was being nice, but I don't know, sometimes you just feel like something is different. And I felt like something was different and I couldn't put my finger on it. So to validate what you were feeling, I definitely was sensing something. And again, if someone was going to ask me, did he do anything? Did he say anything? No. But I've been married to him for several years. He was odd. So when I went into the office around noon, I called you and you said, would you be able to leave work right now? And I don't really think I thought about it. I think I just said, yes, let's do this.
The things that she described check off all of the boxes on the lethality assessment. So I was thinking it should be a no-brainer for her to get a protective order if we go to the domestic violence shelter. The domestic violence shelter sometimes does not know exactly how to help victims. Police obviously don't know what they're doing most of the time, although we do have a positive story about a police officer that I'm excited to tell you guys. I remember you saying, what am I going to tell him? And I was like, you never have to talk to him again, ever. You don't have kids with him. You literally never have to talk to him again. Just leave work, come, leave all your stuff at home. We can figure that out later. We'll get you a protective order, and then you can go back with a police escort and get your stuff. And so she has a domestic abuse expert, me. I've been trained in the state that I live in. I know what I'm doing. I also know how hard it is, but it was still shocking to me how bad the local services were here at BTR. We do coaching and group sessions every day, and women get help in the form of support and validation. All of our services are online. We can help victims navigate local services since they're usually so bad and what they can do next. But I don't normally have somebody in my car driving them around, right?
I was pretty much in a state of shock the entire day. I was terrified. Absolutely terrified. I was afraid what was going to happen when he found out.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking worst case scenario. I was not massively hopeful, but very grateful, just grabbing the lifeline, hoping that was going to work out. I let my work know that I had an emergency and needed to leave. And I drove and met you. We left my car somewhere and drove to a resource center, which we struggled to get into.
It was impossible.
Literally.
They wouldn't let us in.
It was like a secret special button. We got in. Eventually someone came to the desk. It's awful. And they handed me some paperwork. I'm not really sure what the paperwork was.
It was to get services as a victim of domestic abuse. So we walk into this domestic violence shelter, which also gives services, not because she needs shelter. She can live with a family, but because that's the place you go when you need local services. And like, there were no services. I'm like, she needs a protective order right now. She's checking all the lethality assessment boxes. They're like, be-do. We don't even know what that is.
It's like a teenager.
I'm like, I know what I'm talking about. She needs a protective order. And she was like, oh, thanks for the paperwork. You'll hear back from us in a couple days. Both of us look at each other because we know he's coming after her. We're not being dramatic here. Yeah. He's tracking her. Yeah. He has left the house. That's one of the lethality assessment boxes to check that I'm talking about. And I'm like, we need a protective order now. This is going to become an incident. We need police protection now. And she was like, oh, we'll call you in a couple days. And I was like, no, I can't take her home. In this moment, I am the domestic abuse expert and Joyce is like out for the count. Emotionally, physically, she's just like, what is happening? My husband's coming after me. He's got guns. So I make an executive decision to take her to the hospital. I know the ER has social workers and people that can help her and security.
Yes.
And that she will be safe there for hours. Hopefully
Yeah.
she can just sit in this ER and be safe, and he won't know where she is until things can get settled. So I take her to the ER and she's admitted, and then at least we know she's safe for a minute because there's security.
The hospital's probably the best thing that could have happened, because I had not received any treatment for my neck for a couple of weeks because I didn't dare. They were extremely kind. They asked a lot of good questions. It was probably the least stressful experience I've had at a doctor, which is bizarre. They didn't put pressure on me for anything. They just asked me questions, and they said, this is what we're going to do. They got me in. They did a scan to make sure there weren't any severe injuries. I was able to tell them what happened. The social worker came in, and then eventually they had a couple police officers come in as well. They were all really good, really matter of fact. They're extremely patient because I was an absolute mess. Meanwhile, Anne was coordinating with my dad to make sure that he was safe. Obviously, I'm worried about my safety, but I'm also worried about my family members' safety.
Mm-hmm. She has reconnected with friends since. Also, we've been hanging out now that she's my neighbor. And we've been going to movies, and she came to my daughter's play last night.
It was awesome.
Yes, she's amazing. But at the time, I just met her, and she had been so isolated and in the fog that the nurse asked her, pointing to me, like, who is this? And she started crying, and the nurse said, is this your friend? And Joyce just nodded and started crying. And then the nurse said, is she your best friend? And Joyce was like, yes.
Yes.
And I thought, I am her best friend right now.
Absolutely.
I'm also her only friend right now because she's been so isolated. Yeah. Not that I'm your only friend. The emotion of that moment and knowing that, like, you didn't have anyone else except for your family. And I had to leave because my son had a band trip and I was a chaperone. The bus was leaving. So I called a friend, Leah Moses, who is such a dear friend of mine. Her son was murdered by her ex-husband. And I'm like, can you get to the hospital? I cannot leave Joyce by herself. Thank goodness Leah could go. So Leah came and I left Joyce at the hospital. And before I went home, I wanted to drive past Joyce's dad's house. I knew I'd be safe driving past since Joyce's husband didn't know who I was or that I was helping her, and I just seemed like a soccer mom driving by in a minivan. And guess who's in the driveway? 2 of our city police with her dad. She did not have a protective order at this time. We couldn't get one. Her husband is on speakerphone with our city police. And this police officer says to her husband, you are not welcome in our city. If you come here, we will arrest you. Do not come. I was so excited. I was like jumping up and down. And then her husband said, oh, really? Oh, can you tell me what's going on? This doesn't sound like Joyce. Maybe she's having a mental health crisis. And I was like, he's a full-on abuser. This is exactly what they sound like. This is what emotional and psychological abuse sounds like. He sounded so nice and so calm. And then he started saying stuff about your dad. I'll call him Bob. Is Bob okay? Is his health okay? I don't think he would be like this. He's always welcomed me to his home before. What's going on? I'm so confused. Then the officer said, you are not welcome here. You will be arrested. Do not come. And hung up. Immediately after, your husband texted your dad, and your dad pulls out his phone, and there's a text like, hey, Bob, are you doing okay? What's happened? I'm confused. Why are the police calling me? And I'm like, you know full well why they're calling you. Your dad looked at me like, what do I say? I was like, nothing. Block him. Don't talk to him. Mm-hmm. And I said, if he shows up, and the police were like nodding their head, do not talk to him. Don't open the door. Nothing. The police were amazing in that moment. I was so grateful that they did that, and your dad felt better. A protective order, it's just a piece of paper, but with it you can call on the police. You're not welcome here is just as effective as a protective order. So then I got on a bus to go on my son's band trip.
Your friend was amazing, and I just want to say thank you for her.
Yeah, she's amazing.
To come help someone out when she's been through that, I can't even imagine. I got very lucky that day. Very, very grateful. I was at the hospital for several hours. Eventually, they discharged me, so I called my sister, and she was able to come get me. The rest of the day, I think I was just a mess. I was scared. I think to some extent angry at myself, which I'm only saying because I think that this is probably common. I was angry that I couldn't find a way to get out without fuss, because I felt so guilty for all of the people who had been put out by the situation that I felt like I should have been able to handle. But the truth is I couldn't. If I could have gotten out, I would have. I really did have no way of getting out. There was a camera in my car. There were cameras all over our home. As you said, we knew he left because I got an alert telling me I don't think I could have got out any other way.
If you had not been surprised, he also would not have been surprised. Like, we surprised him because you didn't even know.
No, this was not the plan.
No.
I think that is probably important. I was starting to try to think, I need a plan, but I definitely didn't have a plan. I do now have a protective order. The victim advocate has been amazing. An officer went to my spouse's house, asked him about the incident, and I think he still must have thought he didn't do anything wrong, because he told them exactly the same thing I told them. And that's an assault. So he's being charged with assault. And because of that, the courts put in place a protective order, which has helped me relax a little bit. One day I'll be able to fully relax. That day is not here yet. I'm just trying to take everything as it comes. But I'm so, so grateful to have met you. Thank you for being there.
Thank you. You didn't put anybody out. I was so grateful to be there to help you. I mean, that is serious stuff.
Yeah.
To have the honor of helping you.
Thank you.
And I think everyone felt that way. It was an honor to assist you in your time of need. You cannot do this alone.
No.
And so for women listening who may be making steps toward emotional safety, using emotional safety strategies, but intending to remain married. If you don't have anyone, our BTR group sessions are awesome. Reaching out for help is also a way to really realize if it is abuse. If you're wondering, is this abuse? Is it not? Being educated about abuse does not create abuse out of thin air.
No.
But it helps you realize that is the thing that's happening abuse or not. Because the abuser really does not want you to find out that it's not you, it's him.
Yeah.
So the title of this episode is How Emotional Abuse Affects Your Body. Can you talk about how it affected your body then, maybe when you were going through it and you didn't even know, and then how it's affecting you now during the recovery from these emotional injuries? I'll say emotional and psychological injuries because although her neck was injured, from my perspective, the neck injury is the least of your injuries.
Right. The neck injury, I could not excuse or reconcile in any way, shape, or form. That had taken a turn into physical violence, and I don't think you come back from that.
Right. This is 7 years in. This isn't like the first few months into the relationship.
It took a turn that I was not expecting. Throughout the marriage, the psychological, emotional, and financial abuse was pretty severe. And I'm going to be dealing with that for a while, longer than I'm dealing with the neck injury. My body was telling me something was wrong before I let myself accept that on a mental level. Throughout the marriage, my hair was coming out in chunks. Whenever I washed my hair, just like handfuls of hair would come out. I talked to my doctor about it. She said, it's probably stress. Great. Awesome. I don't know how to fix that. My nails, like my middle fingernails, split constantly no matter what I did. I was exhausted, constantly exhausted. My spouse put a lot of shame and guilt on me for us not being at our optimum health. I am in worse physical shape now than when we got married. Part of that is he wouldn't let me go to the gym. I had restrictions that I didn't have my normal avenues of being healthy. My body was just breaking down under the psychological, emotional, and financial abuse. I've got a heart arrhythmia, which is getting better. So my dog, he was my dog before we got married. I was able to get him, and he is now with me. He was diagnosed with a heart murmur a couple of years ago, and they don't really know what caused it. He had a vet checkup about a week ago. It's gone. He doesn't have it anymore. And that almost makes me angrier than anything. He was subjected to emotional abuse as well. I'm just really grateful he's out of there. But the fact that it wasn't just my health. Any living being in that household was suffering. They don't have any other explanation for why his heart murmur is gone, but it's gone. They said he's in amazing physical condition. I haven't heard that in 7 years, that he's in good health. Yeah, that makes me angrier than anything. I knew my health was bad, but I took that upon me. It's my fault. It wasn't. It isn't. Gotta pay attention to your health. Sometimes you have to just stop and listen to your body, and if it is telling you something is wrong, maybe that is your sign.
Yeah. She's sitting right next to me, so how are your nails now?
They're,
look at them.
They're short, but there's no crack.
Nothing.
No, it's not cracked.
And you're not bald.
And I'm not bald.
Have you had hair fall out lately?
No, like 1 or 2.
And you're not as tired?
No, I'm not as tired. I've lost 15 pounds, and my diet is not amazing right now, but I have more energy. I am taking my dog on a walk. He's getting more exercise. I'm getting outside with him. He's healthier. I'm healthier. The major change in my life is being out of that environment. If my health wasn't a good enough indicator, his definitely is.
I talked to your dad. Her dad also went to my daughter's play last night. He's been amazing. He's helped my daughter with her singing because he's a choir teacher.
He loves doing that.
Yes, he's been great. So it's been awesome for me because I get these new amazing people in my life that I'm so grateful for. What is your family saying?
They all feel that my vibe has improved. It's much better. The fact that they actually see me, they said a huge improvement. People are like, you look really good. And I'm like, yeah, thanks. I'm not getting torn down every minute of every day.
Right.
It's nice.
When I picked her up at her parents' house to take her to the domestic violence shelter to try and get the protective order, I think you apologized. Literally, I'm making this up, like 427 times or something. I was like, I know you've been abused, and I know that I should not tell you what to do, but stop apologizing already. You're not doing anything wrong. She was in this cave of lies.
So many. Oh, it was so bad. He forced me to apologize. So it really couldn't win on any level. Just as an example, a few weeks ago, I had a breakdown because I realized at 2 a.m. when I went to the bathroom, I forgot to flush the toilet. And I was just petrified for a few minutes. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute. I'm not going to get reamed about this, because if I was still with my spouse, have a talking to, he would yell at me for being careless and unhygienic. And then he would remind me every time I went to the bathroom for a week at least to make sure I flushed it. And he would occasionally just happen to be in the bathroom to make sure that I was doing it. Just a glimmer of why I was so overly apologetic for being what I felt was a problem to other people.
Right. For me, for a year after, I was fighting with my ex in my own head. Like, I was talking to him, I was having arguments with him in my head, figure out what was happening, and I had to be like, oh, he's not here anymore. I don't have to have an argument with him anymore. It's this period of time where they haunt you even though they're not around.
Oh,
Do you
totally.
feel like that's been happening at all?
Oh, yeah. It's not arguments in my case, it's, why did you do that? You're so stupid. Can't believe you did that. You know better. Incessant negativity about anything. I find myself trying to preemptively prepare for an argument. Like, if traffic was bad and I'm going to be late, I get physically tense and panicky, and I'm trying to remind myself more, you don't have to do that, but it's going to be a slow process. I just never want to see him again. I really don't. I don't want to say I hope he finds help, but I hope that this doesn't happen again. I'm technically round 2 for him.
Right. Like a new victim, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
that's probably what happened in his first marriage. By the way, I messaged his first wife on Facebook. Did I give her my phone number or your phone number?
I don't know, but I haven't heard from her. And if she doesn't want to talk about it, that's
no problem.
Absolutely no pressure.
We need to get her on the podcast. Where is she? Right.
I don't believe he was honest with me about what happened in that marriage. Things he said about her were not true. On behalf of other people who are listening, I just want to say thank you for all of the work that you're doing. When we first met, you told me that you were grateful for your abuser because BTR would have happened without him. I told you that was BS. Because I do not have the intelligence, fortitude, or skill to go out and create an organization that helps women, do podcasts, do all of this writing. That is you. It's not him. That comes from you. And you're a wonderful, special person who is making a huge difference in the world. I'm not overstating things when I say that. I think you might have saved my life. And I'm so grateful to people who are listening to this. There's never a good time. There will never be a good time. Find friends. BTR is an excellent resource. You might feel totally alone and you might be horribly isolated. I speak from experience, but there are people who can help you. Don't give up.
And they will become your best friends.
And they will be awesome friends and wonderful people and let you come to their kids' concerts, which are amazing. Well, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's still 1 step forward.
So because she now lives in my neighborhood, I'm going to have her back on in 6 months to a year. See how things are going. Right now, I'm helping her through the divorce process. I can't personally help everyone that listens to the podcast for obvious reasons. If you need support, the BTR coaches are here for you. Our coaches are online, ready to help you in daily group sessions and individual sessions. Joyce, you are brave, you are strong, you're incredible, you're beautiful. You're an amazing person.
Oh, thank you.
If this podcast is helpful to you, please help us reach other women by following or subscribing and giving us a 5-star rating. Thank you for helping other women find us. If you've already purchased a copy of my book, Trauma Mama, Husband Drama, please circle back and give it a 5-star rating. A lot of women are searching for books about betrayal trauma on Amazon, and rating Trauma Mama will help them find this podcast, which is free to everyone. Your donations keep this podcast going. Go to our website, btr.org, scroll to the bottom, click on Support the BTR Podcast. And until next week, stay safe out there.